Welcome to another episode of the Read Pile. Today I'm returning to Hickman's 4-volume Fantastic Four complete collection. It's been, for me, a few weeks. Volume 2 was a very long video, but a lot happened. Volume 3 is even bigger. Let's see there. And I'll get into it, but I don't think as much happens in Volume 3, especially Volumes 1 and 2. So let's start and get into it. Volume 2 left off with Atlan showing up at Old Atlantis, where a fight had just happened between one of the Reeds and Sue, and Sue and crew had gotten really their butts kicked. So they returned to the Baxter building, and Volume 3 starts with this months ago. We get this entire first issue of the Inhumans, the Kree, War of the Kings, and we see what happens. So there's the fight between Vulcan and Black Bolt. See the wives, Black Bolt's wives, and this is weeks ago, so we're still in the past, but catching up to the present. And you can see he was walking off. Maximus. I'm trying to remember. I think War of the Kings was the first time I'd really read Maximus, and I became a fan of him. Like he's nuts, but in a very fun way. So there he is, flashing away. Then we get an even further back, so we find out really what happened to the Supreme Intelligence to really see the future. But Supreme Intelligence, there is these pages here talking about the genetic testing that is going on that leads to the Inhumans, and there is a prophecy and genetic prophecy. All of this is referring to Black Bolt specifically, but these events are happening, I think, 300,000 years in the past, and Supreme Intelligence is unhappy with those results. So he sics an accuser on them. Not great. So the Supreme Intelligence stops reading the data that was given to him at 94%, and then he tells the accuser to go kill everything that they were genetically testing, creating, and from that it says hundreds fell. I'm talking about species now, but 5 were saved, and it's not really saved. It's more like they were missed. And from that we then skip over to Black Bolt. I am awake. So then we see within the vault, we see, it's always fun whenever Black Bolt talks. See what he's fighting. He's struggling to survive, and this happens. And here Medusa is holding court. The Kree are not really happy with the Inhumans. Black Bolt shows up. Obviously the Inhumans are happy. The Kree just go back to spouting complaints. Black Bolt is displeased. Awesome. These are the results. It's pretty spectacular. So Crystal's actually given it a choice. They are going back to Earth, but I don't remember where exactly. Was it part of the War of the Kings? Crystal winds up marrying Ronan. So she's given a choice whether or not to come with the Inhumans or to stick with Ronan. She chooses to stay. She's sweet. So here it is, 300,000 years ago. The Supremer seed. It's stuck into a hammer. It's going to stay there for a very long time. So then we come back to 1 month ago, and this is one of the Reeds. Looks like Professor X. And they read his minds. They figure out what's happening. They are also not happy. But here, Black Bolt returns to Atlan. And he meets his other wives for the first time. So that's fun. 4 of them. And there's all 5 standing together. Black Bolt says, war. So now we're caught up with the present. Atlan at the Forever City. Take the city. And then there's a big fight. Meanwhile, back at the Baxter building, So, Sue was at the Forever City. As I said, at the end of Volume 2, it's her Spider-Man, Alex. Alex winds up with a broken arm, but they all come back to the Baxter Building. So there's, like, still a known fight that's happening. Or maybe they assume it's not happening, because I don't know. But they know that there's a problem, and they're sort of chill about it, which I find strange. But anyway, we get this panel, which is glorious. I mean, just what the artist can do with just posing Sue is phenomenal. I love this panel. So Sue confronts Nathaniel, and one of the things I should talk about is in my video for Volume 2, I talk a little bit about Nathaniel and how I didn't think he'd really earned his place in the Future Foundation, because he at no point really establishes that he's smart. He's from the future, or I think, as he says in Volume 3, he's from all futures. Whatever. That's a knowledge, but it's not really applied knowledge, if you understand. It's he knows things about the future, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's smart, and I still don't think that he's well established as far as characters go in this series. I've also done a minor amount of Googling on Nathaniel, just because, well, Ant-Man and the Wasp came out, and in Volume 2 they make a reference to Immortus, who I thought was a version of Kang, but I've said this before, I haven't really read much Fantastic Four. I also haven't read, honestly, much Avengers, and Kang is someone that seems like he has an even more complicated history than Wolverine. So I've always just avoided it. If he shows up in a book, I take it as face value, and I don't really try to put any pieces together as far as a personal timeline. But I did read Young Avengers, which had Iron Lad, and that was also a version of Kang. Nathaniel, like, I'm honestly, purposely, intentionally not reading up on Kang at this point, because I just don't know if I want that knowledge in my brain. But just because you know things about the future doesn't necessarily mean that you're smart. And I still don't think, in the end of the day, I still don't think he's properly established as far as things go. He just sort of shows up and he reads Dad, and he does dad or grandfatherly things, and he's also kind of a dick. So, despite my lack of knowledge, I think the argument still stands. Alright, so we have Sue, we have Nathaniel, Reed shows up, they talk things out. They say that they are going to go. And again, I love any infusion of Spider-Man into this extremely serious family. But here we have the villains of the combined Future Foundation that also want to go to the Forever City. So everyone shows up, and a fight breaks out, and things immediately go wrong. But first we get to see Valeria. She is grounded for, I guess, the first time, because she will be grounded again a little bit later. Bentley shows up to rescue her. Medusa shows up and takes Reed and Nathaniel away. I think Spider-Man 2, I think all three of them. We'll come back to that. There's a lot of rotating the scenes here, but we have Doom fighting. We have one of the Reeds, and he gets he gets betrayed. So here, Reed, Nathaniel, Spider-Man show up on Atalan. Again, we have Spider-Man being Spider-Man. This is their reaction. Everyone just stares at him and he goes, let's go play with the dog. It's great. Reed tries to explain what they're up to. Medusa is speaking. I'm supposing for Black Bolt at this point. Where did it go? Those plans conflict with ours. There's this quiet scene with Bentley and Valeria, and that will have ramifications. But it's just a nice scene. Meanwhile, the fight continues. As the AIM guys, they are realizing that they are in over their head. Mole Man's like, F this, I'm getting out of here. He leaves. So there are 2 reeds at this point. See here, Karnak jumping in. That's one of the reeds. Takes him down. Doom, meanwhile, sees the other reed. Goes off to fight him. There's a confrontation. Doom ultimately winds up with this collar around his neck. And at this point, he is under Reed's control. But after all of the conversating is done, they get shown at the door. This is wherever you need to be. And I'll step into that, and where they emerge, Reed is the first to show up at the Baxter building. We'll come back to that because a scene change. So we're back at the Kree. We're back at Ronan, who at this point is in charge of the Kree. That's how Black Bolt left it when he went back to Earth. And Ronan here is giving her the choice. What do you want to do? Do you want to be with me, or do you want to be with your family? And here she chooses. This is another great scene. Really, I'm just a huge fan of Sue as written by Hickman, but they hash some things out. Again, a lot of expressive faces in these couple of pages. One of the things that they're talking about is everything that is going on and needing help. So here he's saying, I'll call Ben. But he also says, you're right. No more bad guys in the house? Okay. So one of the reads, this guy here, had taken Doom to Latveria, and that is where Nathaniel shows up. He asks, why are you here? I walk through the door. This is where I needed to be. So Reed armors up for a fight. Sometimes you're an idiot. I'm not here because Victor needs me. I'm here because you do. It's pretty great. So we switch over to the Avengers Mansion, where Thing had been an Avenger, I suppose I should say, for a few months. I don't remember real time, but I do remember reading Thing in the Avengers, and then we see that's where Spider-Man had shown up, and he says, I'm here because I needed to tell you something. Go home. And he does. He comes off, and he says, I thought maybe we could use some help. Whoops. And they step off. This scene here is also pretty great. Reed talking to Valeria. Bentley trying to inject himself. But this will come up later. What she is doing. Ronan shows Crystal that 2 of the Reeds have been captured. So there's these 2 here, plus the one other in Latveria. Meanwhile, we've got Annihilus and his priests. They're making plans. They've got these things located around the city. They're making a ring to make a gate at the center of that, the Baxter building. Reed's giving a speech to this crowd, which I find very strange. Red Hulk especially. We've got Giant Man, who is for some reason giant at the moment, but I don't think a Namor would really sit there. Very tactical looking Black Panther. It's a weird, very strange group. I feel like Iron Man would be trying at least to be up in front. I don't know. There's something about this 2-page spread that I just find more unbelievable than some of the rest of this stuff. And then there's this conversation, which is just rude, that's happening. It's funny. It's also rude. Back to the Forever City. So the Supremer Seed from 300,000 years ago does something to these 2 reeds, and they merge. It's very eerie, into a new Supreme Intelligence. And one of the first things he asks is, where are my armies? And so as people are about to go back to the Forever City, there's now a Kree invasion happening over New York, because obviously the only place anything happens in the Marvel Universe is New York City. Now there is a big fight scene. In addition to the fight that they left a few issues ago, really this many pages ago. The anti-priest calls up Annihilus and says, hey, shit's getting crazy over here. Maybe we should do this gate thing right now. The Supremer senses Black Bolt. He senses the Inhumans, and he wants them destroyed. Extinction he's talking about. So we get some of Annihilus's bugs back inside the Baxter building, and then more fighting. So much fighting. I skipped over some of it already. Fighting. And what Valeria was building is this teleportation translocator. She says that takes the top 3 floors off of the Baxter building and teleports them to safety. There's another great scene here where they see that the Baxter building has a chunk of it has gone missing. Spider-Man says you should go check it out, and Reed says, oh really, you think you can handle this yourself? And Peter's like, maybe I should go check on the kids. So the bugs are left with the portal, and they attach a thing to it so it opens. Spider-Man shows up. Hey, guess what? Fighting. And he's really too late, too slow, because the gate opens and out steps Johnny, who's looking a little troned up, except with this alien stuff on his arm. So then we get months ago, and we see what happened to Johnny over the course of Reed will say a number later, and I did the math, and it was about 4 months that Johnny was presumed dead. And we see in here, so whatever happened to Johnny Storm, we see that he actually did die. He fought off Annihilation's wave, but he ultimately succumbed because there's just too many of them. And here he dies. It's about a few days later. They've been working to get through the gate. It's not working, so Nyla says, bring him back. And we see now this scene that happened in Volume 3, but was silent, because this was part of the post-Johnny Storm death nearly silent issue that happened. But we see this scene again, now with words from Annihilus's perspective, and it's pretty great. This is, it's fun when you get those moments. So in a horrifying way, involving a bunch of worms, they're called, Johnny Storm is brought back to life. And he's imprisoned. He meets up with the Light Brigade, which is a scene that I skipped when I was talking about Volume 1. So hang on just a moment. At the very end of Volume 1, this is after Johnny had invited a woman into the Baxter building who turned out to be an Annihilus agent, and things don't go well. But, so in these final pages of Volume 1, we get back to the Universal Inhumans, and they send off 6 people into Eldrac. Give us a battle that we cannot win. That is their intention, the Light Brigade. And a bit more is explained about them, I think in Volume 2, and then we learn even more in Volume 3. But essentially, they are an offering, a sacrifice. They go into Eldrac, and they wind up in the negative zone. Flash forward, I don't know how many issues it's been, all of Volume 2, and then about a third of the way into Volume 3, we see that the Light Brigade is also in prison. And they are all locked up. They're surly about it. Their intention was to die, and in the negative zone they can't die. They keep being brought back to life. And what Johnny and the Light Brigade are both being subjected to is these combats. Sort of ancient in nature. But one-on-one fights. Johnny just lights everyone up. He tries to go after Annihilus, but with the cosmic control rod, it is there. So he's attached it to this axe that he's got. Johnny can't take on Annihilus, and he keeps waking up. He keeps dying over and over. There's a comment about how it takes less time each time he's brought back, and there's always these worms involved. But that's what Johnny's life is up to for a few months. And then here we see one of the Reeds, talking to Annihilus, making plans, sacrificing this Earth so that he can get back to his. Annihilus, of course, agrees, and at that point, Johnny's like, look, we need to move. He's talking to the Light Brigade. He's like, we need to get the control rod away from Annihilus, and if that happens, then we have a chance. And the Light Brigade says, okay. So here, that fight is kicking off. We get, where is it? This scene here, which is crucial. There. So the axe is away. We have the two of them that see it. They go after it. One hand is clearly in front of the other. And then Johnny's in control. And he has Annihilus on a leash, which is friggin' nutty. We have this scene, which makes a lot of sense to me. Medusa and Black Bolt have a private conversation. I believe the art changes because this is all happening in his head. But she says, I do not like them. These four women, they call themselves your wives. And Black Bolt love me for who I am now, not who I was, which I will bring back up later. We're still in the past. So here is days ago. We have Galactus and Reed and Sue. There's this moment here where Reed is talking about having been given this thing, which will come back up in volume... What are we on? No, it'll come back up at the end of this. He asks, what is this? When the time comes, you're to use the device. It will summon me. Galactus still wants to prevent this future from happening. We get even more flashbacks. We get even more stuff happening in the past. Here, we do know at this point that this is future Franklin, and this is clearly Franklin in the present, but we see what he's been up to. So his birthday was back in Volume 1, and that's when future Franklin shows up for the first time, and he tells himself, remember what you are. And there was a panel of this in that first volume where under the sheets he creates a baby universe. And then we see he's been keeping it in a closet, and him and Leech go off and they have adventures in another universe. And this is a lot of fun. And we see this guy who's negative space for the first time. Now, I don't know how many issues it's been, but a few issues back, the top of the Baxter building teleported away, translocated, as Valeria will point out, and they wind up in a mountain. Actually, they wind up in Latveria, but they don't know that yet. So they are very remote. We're going to Uncle Doom's. They go to the Latverian castle just long enough to meet up with their father, or grandfather, I should say. And then we get yet another flashback, setting things up for what just happened. So here, Nathaniel's talking to Valeria. She's piecing things together, and he tells her some things, but not too much. Now we're back to now, presumably, the actual present, and everyone leaves the castle to go back to Baxter Building. Valeria grabs this, and they're all back, specifically for the bridge. He says it's time to go home. Here, remember how there's, like, a fight happening in New York? Galactic invasion. So we're back to that. Here, Johnny is finally emerging from the gate. Spider-Man is there. Excitement. This is how he tells people he's back. Meanwhile, things haven't stopped at the Forever City. They're just on pause, essentially. Supreme Intelligence tells Ronan he wants to blow up the Earth freely. And Ronan says no. And so the Supreme Intelligence leaves, and he leaves Ronan with his life. So the Kree are still on Earth. It's not being blown up. The Kree, you might not remember, but the Kree are still invading the city. Johnny says, open the gate. And the Annihilation Wave emerges. So now we have over New York, because again, everything happens in New York, a negative zone wave fighting a Kree wave in space. Then the Inhumans enter the fight. But we cut back to Latveria because, and this is where it gets a little bit frustrating. It's switching back and forth between, this is collecting both FF and Fantastic Four, and it's switching back and forth between them. Each has their own storyline going on. They are related, they're connected, they will merge back together, but it's frustrating. It slows everything down, in my opinion, and this is where I'm really talking about just how little actually happens this volume. It's things start, and then there's just a whole series of flashbacks, and it's ultimately good, but also feels hollow, in my opinion, just because of how much time it takes to read this, and then you realize like everything has been on pause, especially with this battle in New York, everything that's been happening at the Forever City. These things come back eventually, but it just feels like it takes forever. I don't remember how much of this I was reading in real time as the issues came out. I remember pieces of this, but some of this is new, and I think a bunch of Volume 4 is new to me. I thought I had read it all, and so I was rereading it, I believed, and yet there's new stuff happening in here that surprises me. So, the gate, the bridge, right? They get it open. Somebody comes flopping out. One of the Reeds, presumably. Everyone else goes in. The Celestials are still there. And guess what? It's another flashback. Here Nathaniel is explaining what he is trying to do, and he's talking about trying to buy time. So, something he knows is going to happen. He's trying for a more favorable outcome. He's trying to change the past, literally. And he's talking about all of this stuff that is happening and trying to space some of it out so that not all of it is happening literally at the same time. He's trying to give, I think they say 27 minutes. They don't say it yet, but here we are, back at now. We're in the space where the Council of Reeds was, and we have a chunk, well, I guess a tiny portion of the Future Foundation, and Dr. Doom and one of the Reeds facing off against Celestials. And then Franklin gets involved. Franklin versus 4 Celestials. One of the Celestials, though, shoots off his fingers into the gate, and the gate is now held open. They can't close it. Most retreat back to our universe. Doom and one of the Reeds stay to fight off the Celestials themselves. Here we are back at the fight that's happening in New York and in space. Some more Sue greatness. There was an explosion. All these guys wind up on their ship. Ship puts their heads in bubbles. Flings one off into space. Like, she's glorious. The battle, meanwhile, is not going well. So, Reed takes the thing that he got from the Herald of Galactus, and from it emerges Galactus. So you've got the Kree, you've got the Negative Zone, Annihilation Wave, and now you've got Galactus all over the Earth. I guess the space above Earth, but Galactus says, "Why did you summon me? This is not yet my time." But Galactus says, "I'll do your dirty work," and takes out the Kree, and then Celestials show up. It's very busy above the Earth right now. But we're going to cut back to these guys, and this is where the timing of some of the stuff, I think the order is a bit off, in my opinion. So I think, I don't know, these could have been reordered to put things a bit more into, I guess, a correct timeline. I don't know. So you get to the emergence of Celestials above the Earth, and then you cut back to where the Celestials were, and you find out what just happened that led to this. Hey, look, it's another flashback. Here Nathaniel says 27 minutes is how much time they want to get. So the ultimate nullifier is being used. They talk about it destroying the user, which one of them disagrees with. We'll see this guy again in Volume 4, even though he's dead. But there goes that Reed. And then Doom is alone to fight off Celestials. It's another flashback. But we see Valeria talking to Doom. She says that she tricked him. And Doom There's nothing but confidence. As he fights 4 Celestials single-handedly. They try to close the bridge, but we get these hands that emerge from it. I don't fully know what I'm looking at there, but I feel like that should have been redrawn. The Baxter building, the top 3 floors of it get wrecked, and then the Celestials emerge. But she says 28 minutes. So they bought the time that they needed. But yeah, this issue ends before the previous issue ends, which is why I'm talking about some of this should have been reordered, in my opinion. But here we have Galactus versus Celestials. And the Kree at this point are like, let's get the hell out of here. And the Inhumans say, we're going to follow them. At this point, Valeria calls up her parents and says, we have a way, but also she recognizes that she's going to be grounded. Galactus takes out one of the Celestials. I think then Voltron style merge into a Super Celestial. I don't know if this thing is actually named, but like that's not great. Also looks very familiar. And we're back to the 4 cities, right? So Old Atlantis, Negative Zone, Blue Area of the Moon, the Forever City. All of this energy, what the Reeds had been doing is building a device to harness the energy. They talk about the sun being involved. It's called Soul's Anvil, and they shoot the new Celestial that breaks the 4 of them apart. One of them is just a husk now. One of them tries to shoot Franklin. It's another one of those things where I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking at, but Johnny does go up. He's talking about having increased power because of the control rod. He does something here, and then it looks like that's healing. So they've done everything they can. They're still losing, and there's sort of a, I'd call it a voiceover, but Sue is remembering a conversation that she had with future Valeria about how everything rests on her. And then these 2 show up. So they had jumped from a collapsing dimension in Volume 2. They finally show up this far into Volume 3. And here we go. So we've got Celestials. Again, we're back in time. Again, this could have been reordered, but the power packs show up because, you know, that's important when you're fighting Celestials. You see more of this guy. Again, I just love this art. Look at that. It's amazing. Again, this issue ends the same way the previous one did. Franklin tells the Celestials, think about that for a minute, because there are now 2 of him. So they can have this conversation. It's a little bit celebratory between Nathaniel, well, between, I guess, all the time travelers, but Nathaniel and the grandchildren. And then they realize that, hey, everybody else is still here too. Get Franklin talking to himself. He borrows some energy. And then it's, once again, Franklin versus the Celestials, but this time it's future Franklin. And it's during this fight where Nathaniel finally starts to explain what has been happening, and everything has led to this. So what he's talking about is ever since Reed walked through the bridge back in Volume 1 and met the Council of Reeds that led to the Celestials, that this has been everything that has been coming. Always the Celestials were going to come through the bridge. The Kree and Inhumans were happening, and he was trying to space out these things to buy enough time for Franklin to reemerge from his dimensional hop. But that is explaining everything here. Then we get this moment that I think is incredible, and I included this in the Galactus review that I did for Shock and Awe. We've got To Me, My Galactus. Franklin and Galactus. I love it. You know, you are something else. And it's really future Franklin that I want a Marvel Legends figure of. This explosion here appears to be the end of the celestial threat, because after that we check back. Hey, remember things were happening in New York? Light Brigade's still there. Future Foundation. That is Christos at the bridge waiting for Doom to emerge. You've got Crystal and Ronan. You've got Galactus. And in his hand, Franklin. Everything's happy now. This scene calls back to an earlier one. Back in Volume 1 between Reed and his father. And then we get kind of an epilogue, and again, just amazing faces. Here Franklin is having a quiet moment with Galactus. Franklin, being from the future, tells Galactus some things that aren't going to happen. And basically telling Galactus that he will not be alone at the end of the universe, that Franklin will be there as well. And Galactus is thankful because he feared really that there it is, dreaded being alone once again. So now we start to skip ahead. We're seeing recovery, we're seeing rebuilding, new Future Foundation suits. I'm totally going to kiss him. Valeria's referring to Bentley. It's amazing art. Again, these faces are incredible. So here Valeria faces her family. Spider-Man being Spider-Man. Hilarious. But she explains some of what she's been up to, and then we see Doom is still over in the... Well, here it's just called Through the Bridge, but in that sort of pocket dimension where the Council of Reeds had been. And that is the end of Volume 3, thankfully. It's huge. I mean, the amount of pages here is just astronomical, but it's, again, ultimately doesn't feel like that much happens. Things start, like there's the start to a fight that happens at Old Atlantis between Inhumans and really the Reeds that sort of doesn't really conclude in these pages because the main characters, the Fantastic Four, had left, and then we just skip ahead to then the Kree fight happening over at New York, and I don't remember if any of that is picked up in another series, but that's, you know, things are happening again elsewhere, so that's just happening on its own, sort of in the background of the Fantastic Four Future Foundation, fighting Celestials, fighting in space. It's honestly a whole lot of flashback, and possibly too much. It unfolds. Like, I enjoy the overall story of it, but it's also kind of frustrating getting to a point and then... So reading an issue, and then reading the next issue is actually back in time, and both issues end at roughly the same point, and then you're like, this alternating storytelling is frustrating. And Volume 4, I think, is better. I'm reading that now. I should do a video soon, but I want to wrap this up. This also went long. Hopefully I can trim this down in editing, but I really, really enjoy, if you haven't discovered it enough, Hickman's Fantastic Four overall run, Future Foundation, Fantastic Four. It's really just incredible stuff.